The chamber was restless, the kind of tension that hums beneath every high-stakes debate. Cameras clicked, pens scratched across notepads, and every eye seemed locked on the unfolding exchange. Senator Patty Murray leaned forward, her voice sharp, but dripping with condescension. She wasn't asking a question. She was issuing a lecture. "Experience matters here," Murray declared, her tone slicing through the chamber like a reprimand from a teacher to a student. "And some people still have a lot to learn." The words hung heavy, not because they were profound, but because of the way she delivered them, like a dagger dipped in superiority. Her smirk followed, a half-smile that said more than the words themselves. It said, "I've been here longer, I've survived the storms, and you're just the new kid on the block." For Jasmine Crockett, that smirk wasn't just an insult to her. It was a slap in the face to every young voice, every immigrant child, every working-class family who ever dared to believe that experience isn't measured in decades of speeches, but in the courage to speak truth to power. The gallery stirred. Journalists typed furiously, knowing the clip was gold for their headlines. Murray School's freshman representative. On social media, the first tweets flew out before the words had even finished echoing. It looked like a classic Washington takedown, a veteran putting a rising star in her place. But the air shifted. The smirk lasted a moment too long, the laughter from her colleagues a beat too sharp. And in that silence, as Crockett straightened her shoulders and took in the glare of the chamber lights, something became clear. This was not humiliation. This was setup. Because beneath the calm surface, Crockett's silence was strategy. She didn't need to fire back right away. She knew the power of patience. And more importantly, she knew something that Patty Murray had, perhaps forgotten. Every record, no matter how polished, carries cracks. The lecture was meant to humiliate, but what came next turned the tables in front of the entire chamber. But Crockett had been preparing for this moment, because Murray's record carried its own hidden story. Patty Murray's words didn't just sting because of their content. They carried the weight of decades in Washington, the voice of an establishment that believed longevity itself was proof of wisdom. To Murray, experience was armor. To Jasmine Crockett, it was too often a mask, shielding career politicians from accountability. This was bigger than two women in a chamber. It was generational, symbolic. On one side stood Murray, the consummate insider. 30 years of speeches, committees, and carefully crafted talking points. On the other stood Crockett, the rising voice, blunt, unapologetic, unwilling to play by the unwritten rules of deference that so often silence newcomers. The clash was no longer just about experience. It was about whose voice America was ready to listen to. For many watching, Murray's lecture felt like more than political theater. It was personal. Viewers at home recognized the tone, the smugness of a boss who dismisses fresh ideas, the sneer of a teacher who underestimates her students, the practiced superiority of someone who believes tenure equals untouchable. The sting was sharper because millions had lived it in their own lives. Murray wasn't just talking to Crockett. She was talking down to everyone who'd ever been told to wait their turn. Reporters in the chamber noticed immediately. Tweets began to flow, rapid fire and ruthless. Patty Murray lectures Crockett like she's a child. Not a good look. Seniority doesn't equal truth. Murray just proved that. Tone deaf. The old guard still doesn't get it. Clips hit. Social media before the debate had even cooled. Murray's smirk was screenshot, memed, dissected. Some praised her confidence, but far more questioned the arrogance of it. And slowly, a narrative began to build. Not of Crockett being silenced, but of Murray exposing exactly why new voices are needed in the first place. Because when Murray leaned on her experience, she didn't realize the ground she stood on wasn't as solid as she thought. Her record was long, yes, but not unblemished. Tucked inside those decades were bills that failed, promises that fizzled, initiatives that never lived up to the speeches. Crockett knew this, and her silence wasn't submission. It was calculation. She was waiting for the moment to turn Murray's weapon into her own downfall. What happened next wasn't just a rebuttal, it was an exposé. Because when Murray leaned on her record, she didn't realize how shaky it really was. Patty Murray did not arrive in that chamber overnight. Her story began in 1992, when she swept into the Senate as part of the so-called Year of the Woman. She was hailed as a trailblazer, a symbol of change at a time when the halls of power were overwhelmingly male. For years, she wore the badge of reformer. But somewhere along the way, the narrative shifted. The once outsider became the consummate insider. 3 decades in office hardened into seniority, and seniority became the lens through which she viewed everything. With each election, Murray grew more untouchable in her state, and with each committee assignment, her reputation as an institutional gatekeeper solidified. She wasn't just a senator anymore, she was the Senate establishment personified, and with that came a tendency to lecture, to remind the younger, fresher voices that she had been here long before them and would likely be here long after. Her colleagues learned this quickly. Murray was known for a tone that could pivot from maternal to dismissive in a breath. In one exchange years earlier, she had waved off a junior senator's proposal on health care, saying, "You'll understand after a few terms here." Another time, when pressed about a stalled education bill, she responded flatly, "Experience teaches patience. New members should take note." For her, these were words of wisdom. For others, they reeked of arrogance. And then there were the bills. A career as long as Murray's comes with successes, yes, but also with failures, and hers were not small. She had championed sweeping education reforms that never made it past committee, veteran support measures that collapsed under budget fights, and healthcare initiatives that fizzled after lofty press conferences. Each time, she leaned on her experience to explain the losses, framing them as inevitable in the messy world of politics. Yet, for families waiting on relief, for veterans waiting on care, and for teachers waiting on resources, the excuses felt hollow. Critics began to point out the contradiction. How could a senator with so much power, so much clout, and so much experience fail to deliver on so many promises? The answer, they argued, was complacency. Murray had mastered the performance of effort without the pain of consequence. As a young girl, Crockett learned the power of persistence. Teachers noted her sharp mind, but it was her drive that set her apart. While others accepted limits, Jasmine pushed through them. She knew that education was her pathway forward, and she chased it with a ferocity that left little room for doubt. She worked her way through school, and when the time came, she set her sights on law. Law school was not a comfortable ascent. It was a battlefield. While many of her classmates leaned on networks of influence, Crockett leaned only on her determination. She gravitated toward cases that others avoided, defending those without money, without status, without hope. For her, the law was never just a profession. It was a shield for the vulnerable, a weapon against exploitation. She quickly earned a reputation not just as a promising attorney, but as a fighter who refused to bend, even under enormous pressure. Her career in law carried her into the streets of Dallas, where she represented activists, workers, and families crushed under systemic inequities. Judges, prosecutors, and even fellow lawyers sometimes scoffed at her directness, but clients loved her for it. She was fearless, unpolished in a way that felt real, and unwilling to soften the truth to appease power. Where others tiptoed, she confronted. Where others sought compromise, she demanded accountability. That same spirit carried her into politics. Running for office wasn't part of some long-planned career arc, it was an extension of who she was. People urged her to bring her voice from the courtroom to the Capitol, to fight for the same justice on a larger stage. And when she won, it was not because she had seniority or institutional backing. It was because people recognized authenticity when they saw it. In Congress, Crockett's reputation grew quickly. She was fiery, but she was also disciplined. She didn't waste her platform on empty platitudes. She used it to highlight inequities, to speak bluntly about what others ignored, and to carry the voices of those who had been silenced. Her colleagues sometimes bristled at her style, but she didn't flinch. The establishment may have seen her as inexperienced, but her constituents saw her as one of their own, and that's what made the clash with Patty Murray so symbolic. Murray embodied decades of status quo, smoothed edges, practiced lines, the weight of experience. Crockett embodied something very different: raw energy, unfiltered truth, and a hunger for accountability. It wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a collision of eras. For Crockett, every smirk from Murray carried echoes of what she had faced her entire life. The teacher who underestimated her, the prosecutor who sneered at her clients, the senior colleagues who thought youth meant ignorance. She had spent her entire career proving them wrong. One case, one election, one speech at a time. This wasn't new terrain. It was familiar ground, and she had come prepared. Long before this debate, Crockett had studied Murray's record with the same intensity she once poured into cross-examinations. She knew where the cracks were. She knew the bills that failed, the promises that collapsed, the votes that contradicted the rhetoric. For Crockett, this wasn't about humiliation or one-upmanship. It was about truth. If Murray wanted to invoke experience as her shield, Crockett was ready to turn that shield into an exposed weakness. The audience watching didn't know all this history, but they could feel it. Every pause in Crockett's silence, every unbroken gaze, every measured breath was built on years of resilience. She wasn't just reacting to a lecture, she was preparing for the moment when patience would transform into power. Because for Jasmine Crockett, intimidation was never an option. She had faced bigger obstacles than a senator's smirk. She had stood against judges who threatened her career, prosecutors who painted her as reckless, and entrenched systems that told her she didn't belong. She didn't just belong, she thrived. And now, standing in the Senate chamber, she was ready to remind everyone watching why her voice mattered. And when Murray pushed too far, Crockett knew exactly where to strike. The chamber was already thick, with tension when Patty Murray leaned in again, her voice laced with the authority of decades in office. She wasn't finished. If anything, the initial lecture had emboldened her. She waved her hand slightly, as though brushing off Crockett's presence altogether, and delivered the next line with a smugness that echoed against the walls. "Representative," she said pointedly, "perhaps in time you'll understand Senate procedure. These things take years to master, and legislative wins aren't built on sound bites. They're earned through experience." Her words drew chuckles from a few of her allies, the kind of muted laughter meant to wound without appearing outright cruel. Murray's smirk widened. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a performance. A reminder to the chamber, and to Crockett herself, of who held seniority and who was still expected to learn. Reporters sitting just rows away typed furiously, their fingers racing to keep up with the unfolding drama. Within seconds, Twitter lit up. Murray lecturing Crockett on experience. Chamber tense. Patty Murray plays professor. Crockett silent, but eyes say everything. Old guard versus new guard playing out live in Senate chamber. The early narrative was clear. Murray was trying to box Crockett into the role of novice, the student, at the feet of the seasoned teacher. And yet, the more Murray spoke, the more glaring the contrast became. Her words dripped with condescension, but Crockett refused to interrupt. She didn't fire back with quips or barbs. Instead, she sat tall, eyes steady, her silence sharper than any interjection could have been. It was a silence that spoke volumes. To those watching closely, it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of strategy. Every jab from Murray only made Crockett's composure more striking. She looked less like a student being scolded and more like a surgeon preparing her instruments, waiting for the exact moment to cut with precision. Journalists began to notice. "Crockett isn't rattled," one tweet observed. "She's waiting." The shift was subtle, but real. The longer Murray mocked, the more the tension in the chamber bent toward Crockett. Every word Murray used to diminish her only inflated the sense that she was overplaying her hand. And then it happened. As Murray wrapped up another line about understanding how real legislation gets done, Crockett moved. Slowly, deliberately, she opened the folder in front of her. Her hands were steady, her expression calm. She turned another page. Or take the Veterans Job Corps Act of 2012. You held press conferences with veterans standing behind you, cameras flashing, promising tens of thousands of jobs, but you failed to build support in your own caucus. The bill collapsed on the Senate floor. Veterans were used as backdrops, not beneficiaries. Murray shifted uncomfortably. Her allies glanced at one another, some suddenly fascinated by their notes. Crockett pressed on. And then there's health care. In 2014, you promised sweeping improvements for women's access. You introduced the Healthy Families Act. Do you recall? Paid sick leave, stronger workplace protections. You touted it as groundbreaking. Crockett paused, letting the silence linger. It never made it out of subcommittee. A press release, nothing more. The smirk was gone now. Murray's lips tightened, her gaze fixed on the desk. The once confident veteran was shrinking under the weight of her own record. The room shifted. With her. Senators who had laughed moments earlier now avoided eye contact. Reporters stopped tweeting for fear of missing a line that was already crystallizing into history. The only sound was Crockett's voice. Steady, calm, devastating. For 30 years, you have promised sweeping change. And yes, there are successes in your record, but when you mock me for being new here, when you equate longevity with superiority, I have to ask, how many families waited through those decades only to find your promises still unfulfilled? How many students, veterans, and workers were told to wait their turn, just as you told me today? Murray's hands clasped tighter. For the first time in memory, the veteran senator looked less like the untouchable gatekeeper and more like a chastened pupil. Crockett lowered her folder slightly, her eyes locking on Murray's. Experience should mean effectiveness, and yet your so-called experience has left behind a trail of broken bills and unkept commitments. If that's the lesson you want to teach me, Senator, then I respectfully decline to learn it. The chamber erupted, not in noise, but in silence. A heavy, stunned silence that spoke louder than applause. Reporters stared at one another in disbelief. A few whispered, "She just ended her," while others scrambled to capture screenshots of Murray's expression. And then the dam broke. On social media, clips of Murray's smirk dissolving into discomfort went viral within minutes. Crockett schools. Murray with her own record shot up as a trending topic. Hashtags multiplied, ICSU lesson learned, you receipts, ready, you Crockett vs. Murray. Memes flooded, timelines contrasting Murray's opening lecture with the stunned silence that followed. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her calm precision was victory enough. By citing specifics, she had transformed Murray's weapon of experience into evidence of failure. And she had done it without raising her voice, without theatrics, just facts, delivered with unflinching confidence. By the time she finished, the lecture had become a lesson, and Patty Murray was the student. The moment Crockett closed her folder, the air inside the chamber seemed to thicken. A sharp intake of breath came from the gallery, followed by an audible gasp from one of the journalists pressed against the back wall. Reporters who had been tapping away at laptops froze, realizing the spectacle had shifted from routine Senate bickering into something historic. Murray sat stiffly, her silence louder than any retort. No ally rushed to her defense. No sympathetic cough or procedural diversion came to rescue her. The chamber, so often a stage for partisan noise, now felt like a cathedral of reckoning. The first tweets trickled out within seconds. Gasps in Senate chamber as Crockett dismantles Murray's record. Live tension you can feel through the screen. Whoa! Jasmine Crockett just turned Patty Murray's lecture into a self-own of epic proportions. Schooled by Crockett, this is going to blow up. And blow up it did. Within 20 minutes, Murray exposed, schooled by Crockett, and Experience V's results were trending nationally. Clips of Crockett's calm delivery circulated faster than Murray's staff could draft a response. Side-by-side screenshots proliferated. Murray's smirk at the start against her tightened jaw by the end. The contrast became the meme of the night. Experience doesn't mean anything if all you've got are failed bills, one viral post declared, paired with an image of Crockett holding her folder like a sword. Celebrities weighed in. A-list. Actors known for their activism praised Crockett's composure. Singers tweeted lyrics about truth-telling alongside hashtags. Late-night comedians promised segments before the night was even over. Political veterans, some with grudges against Murray, others simply stunned, took to cable panels and podcasts. "I've been around this chamber for 30 years," one former senator admitted, "and I've never seen Patty Murray look so cornered." Even rival politicians on the opposite side of the aisle chimed in. One conservative commentator quipped, "I don't agree with Rep. Crockett on much, but that was a masterclass in receipts." The clip, predictably, went viral with progressives, celebrating that even opponents had to give respect. Meanwhile, Murray's office scrambled. A hastily drafted statement framed Crockett's comments as selective and misleading. But the tone deafness only her dignity turned into a mirror for the nation. Viewers saw in her calm defiance the faces of their own daughters and sons, immigrants who sacrificed for opportunity, workers who endured being talked down to by bosses who mistook seniority for wisdom. Crockett became more than a politician in that instant. She became a stand-in for every underdog who has ever been told to wait their turn. The moral echoed far beyond the marble walls of the Senate. Service matters more than status. Truth carries more weight than arrogance. And experience, when divorced from results, is nothing but a hollow credential. Crockett's performance reminded the country that accountability does not care about how many years someone has held power. It cares about what they've done with it. Commentators seized on that framing. Op-eds spoke of a generational reckoning. Editorial boards urged leaders to take note. This was not just a freshman rebuttal. It was a declaration that the old rules of untouchability no longer apply. But the emotional core belonged not to pundits, but to everyday people. In letters to the editor, in viral TikToks, in heartfelt Facebook posts, citizens shared their own experiences of being underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. Crockett's stand became their stand. Her victory was their vindication, and in that way, the clash transcended politics. It became a parable about power and respect. Respect is not conferred by seniority. It is earned by service. Authority without accountability crumbles when confronted by truth. The lesson lingered not because Crockett humiliated Murray, but because she reminded millions that dignity can endure mockery, and that truth, when spoken plainly, is its own kind of thunder. And for millions watching, the lesson was clear. Respect is earned, not inherited. Patty Murray had set out to lecture Jasmine Crockett, wielding her decades in office like a weapon of superiority. But by the end, that very record became the weight that sank her argument. The lesson she tried to deliver ricocheted back onto herself, and in front of the entire nation, the tables turned. This moment was never just about one clash in a Senate chamber. It was about the larger truth that arrogance can wear a polished smile, but it cannot withstand accountability. Crockett's composure reminded America that honor matters more than bluster, that results matter more than resumes, and that accountability will always outweigh empty tenure. For millions watching, the scene felt like more than politics. It felt like justice. It was proof that truth, spoken with dignity, can silence even the most entrenched power. And it was a reminder that the future of American politics does not belong to those who cling to titles, but to those who serve with courage and authenticity. That is the power of a single voice refusing to be diminished. That is the spark of a movement that demands better. If you believe in voices like Jasmine Crockett's, share this story. If you want dignity to replace arrogance in our politics, subscribe and be part of this community. And if you know someone who's ever been told they're too young, too new, or not experienced enough, send them this video. Because tonight, the so-called lesson turned into a warning for the establishment. The age of untouchability is ending. The lecture was meant to humiliate. Instead, it became a rallying cry. And now, the next chapter belongs to all of us.